and study a portion of His Word. This morning we're going to be in Ecclesiastes, and we're going to begin at verse 9. Now, what we've done in the book of Ecclesiastes is kind of seeing how we live here on this earth, under the sun. And many things are mentioned about the way of life, the winds, the rain, the sun comes up, the sun goes down, the moon's there, everything God set in motion. In chapter 3, we read about how there's a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. And all the things that apply to us are set in motion by God. He's the one that created the whole thing, right? So all the things that happen to us are placed there for our benefit. Now you say, well, there's a lot of hard times, a lot of hardships, a lot of things, but I think we can learn from our hardships and troubles. The travails we face and the problems. And I think one of the main things that we should understand is maybe all the problems and troubles and the ever-changing things lead us to want to find something that is constant and sure and without problems. And what would that be? It would be the hope of heaven, right? So God has given us a challenge in the things that we study. And so when we read these first 8 verses in chapter 3 about all the things, there's a time to get, a time to lose. Well, we've all experienced that to a point or something. A time to love, a time to hate. We've all experienced that somewhere in our life. A time to build, a time to tear down. We've probably all experienced that or seen it done at least. I mean, there's parts of our life that we really just have no control over. But each and every change gives us an opportunity to grow stronger in our hope of God. Now, it's not always easy. Don't ever think of it as it's a piece of cake and a cakewalk. But every challenge that mankind faces on this planet, we can turn it into something good for ourselves and drive toward heaven and keep our hope up, keep our hope for sure that we can go to heaven. And so when we draw the conclusion of all these things that's changing that we read in these first 8 verses, so what kind of conclusion can we draw? One thing I think that we'll see is there's never a continuing satisfaction of the things under the sun. A time to love, a time to hate. Well, when you got a time to love, a time to embrace, a time to love, and then there's a time to hate. Something changes. So there's no satisfaction in the continuance of one thing any more than there is a continuance in the other, because it's ever changing. And so we need to be seeking what we can call a continuing satisfaction, a continuing hope. And these tests and these trials that we face can either tear us down, drive us away from God, or we can accept what God has set in motion. And this was written like, 1,000 years or more before Christ, and there's nothing changed for mankind. This happened in Solomon's day. It's happening in our day. So the consistency of the change is God is consistent for all people. He's not a respecter of person. He chooses for all people. And what we have in this continuing change is that we can't change it. We have no ability to change what God has set in motion. And we cannot change an unchanging God. So what God is doing for us, let's don't look at it as a burden. Let's look at it as a trial, a test, a travail, whatever you want to call it. But it's a test for us to lean more on God, to trust in Him more. Not to drive us away from God, but to drive us to God. And when we see these changes, we need to be prepared. And in verse 9, what profit hath he that worketh in that wherein he laboreth? What profit is there in anything you gain here under the sun? Now, don't get me wrong, you can enjoy life, and we'll see that in a few verses. But the question here in verse 9, what profit hath he that worketh in that wherein he laboreth? Okay, you build something nice, and then something happens, you have to tear it down, or it gets torn down. You know, when they built Interstate 64 through, man, there was just almost a war where people, I mean, they drove that thing right through people's houses. I remember one of my neighbors, it went in the front door and out the back. And, I mean, there was just a lot of, you know, build a home there, build a house, had his family. And it took it. And so there's time that we gain, there's time to lose. So what is the profit that we gain that is forever satisfying on this planet? There's probably nothing, right? So then where do we look to find what is continuing that we can depend on? And that's God. That's God. That's where our profit, eternal profit, is. Verse 10, I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. Now, he doesn't say to be enjoyed in it, to relish in it. He says to be exercised in it. We are to work. We are to apply ourselves to all these changes. And when we look through these changes, what is it that we can change? Ourselves. We can change ourselves from hating the change and accepting the challenge of something new and accepting it instead of worrying with the change. And I think that's what he's saying here. I have seen the travail, the problems that we all face, which God has given. God has given us this travail, this challenge. And it's just a way of life. It's not, God didn't say, I'm going to make Tom Markham's life miserable. That's not what he's doing. This is 1,000 years before Christ or more. It's not changed for anybody. God said, I'm going to do this, that man will seek the true peace. And we know how the book ends. We know how Ecclesiastes ends, right? Fear God and keep his commandments. And that's what he's teaching us. He's teaching us, God, through his word here in Ecclesiastes, to set your affections on things above, right? Now, we're going to go through this. These challenges that he's put before us, we're going to go through them. So what are we going to do with them? He hath made everything beautiful, this verse 11. In his time also he has set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. Now that verse to me is a little bit difficult. But he hath made everything beautiful in his time. In his time. The purpose that God has for us works for the good of all who love him, right? So our challenges that we face under the sun helps us to question. Oh, man, that's a dangerous way to say it. But we question, why does it happen? Someone gets sick and they go, well, why did it happen to them? Well, why not them? Why not me? Why not you? So what is this stuff that he has made everything beautiful? And he also says he has set the world in their heart. He set this in our hearts to figure out what's he trying to do here? Well, we can't figure it out because we can't go all the way back to the beginning and see why he set it up or go to the end and see how it all worked together for the good of them that love him. Brother Philip?
You know, he says he has made everything beautiful in his time. Let's go back to what started this off was about the season. You know, we know the flowers bloom in their time.
Right.
We ain't got a clue why. We don't know how that works. But he's given us enough. He set the world in our heart that we know that there's 4 seasons. And we know that there's time to live, time to die, a time when it's beautiful and a time when it's falling away.
Yep.
And that's what I get when I see he has made everything beautiful in his day. It's not God's time, it's in the things time. It's a little age.
Yeah.
And that's how I see it. Is, you know, it goes right along with everything that we see in the time for. And he built us up to this here. He has made everything beautiful. When God looked over his creation, when he was done on the 6th day, and he looked over all his creation, what did he say? Good.
It is good. It was very good.
You see, that's lost meaning in our world, and that's because it's not in us to figure it out.
Right.
Ours is good. When God said something was good, that's very big. I'm not going to get too deep into that because that's part of our study.
Yeah.
We went deep into it. We get in there. He says God is good and God doeth good.
Right.
Those are big statements, and that's a big word.
Yep.
That it is good.
Do you have something, Richard?
Strong's definition, or what Strong's has to say about the word world here, Olam or something like that, it's vanishing point, time out of mind, eternity.
Right.
So the idea of eternity has been seated in man by God. People look around and say, well, is this all there is? There's got to be something more than just this life that I'm living.
The very
What's the use of it if it's not? If
Yeah.
it's not something else, what's the use of it?
Yeah, what's the purpose? And that's exactly, if you even ask that question, you've got it in your mind there's more. Or you wouldn't ask that question. And I think that's exactly what he's doing here when he says he set the world in their heart. He has set, why does the flowers bloom when they do? Why do they die when they do? Why do we question? Why does the sun come up at the same time? Why does the sun set? Why does the rain come? What is all this about? Well, we got one lifetime to question all this. And we go through verses 2 through 8 and all these challenges that we face. And we question, what's this for, right? That's what God has said in our heart. What's this for? Why? Because eternity. And you'll see before this chapter ends exactly what he's talking about. In the ascending of the soul of man and the descending of the beast. Okay? So there's a difference. But there is an eternity, and the writer here is pointing it out to us that God has put this in our heart. All these seasons of things to happen makes us wonder, what's it about? Just like Richard brought up. It's about eternity. Right? First of all, remember this. God never intended for you to have a permanent rest on this planet. We're not at rest. We can go to bed and get sleep and rest. And then we get up and toil and labor and see all the stuff that's going on, all the things, the vexation of our spirit, the challenges that we face to remain Christians. All of that we got to go through. But it's not a rest. It's not the eternal rest. So if we get this part about the world here being set in our heart seeking eternity, If we get that part, then we go, okay, I can't get any rest here. I can't get any permanent satisfaction. But yet there's an eternity I'm going to have to face. How do I find that permanent peace? Well, God has set it in your heart, right, to seek that. And all these challenges and everything that we face. So it says, no man can find out the work that God maketh from beginning to end. We can't understand everything God does. And I think it's Deuteronomy 18:18 that tells us the secret things belong to God. Let me see if I can find that. Nope, that's the wrong one. Let's try 29. Let me see if I can find it. 29:29. The secret things belong unto the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law. So there's things that God has set in motion that we cannot figure out. So why is there a time to be born and a time to die? Why do we have to die? Why do we have to love one minute and hate the next? Why do we have to labor and toil to build and then labor and toil and tear it down? Why? What's all that about? Well, from the beginning to the end, it's kind of hard to understand. Why didn't God just say, okay, I'm going to get rid of all the sin, all the problems, I'm just going to let everybody be in? No, that's no challenge. That doesn't mean you'll ever love God. But when you realize the challenges He's put before us, then we have a goal to set for ourselves. And that goal is eternity in heaven with God. That's what our goal should be, right? And so we see an unchanging God, but we see an ever-changing challenge. Okay, you go out and you build a house. You get it all framed up, you got it all real nice, and you got it all finished, inside and out. Now you've created yourself another job, you got to put furniture in it. Okay, then you go put furniture in it. And now you've created yourself another job because you got to keep it clean. Right? I mean, every time we do something, there's something else to do. He never intended for man to be here on this planet not doing something. You need to be doing something. And it needs to be, according to the end of verse 12, we need to be doing good. Not just doing something to be doing something, but we need to be doing good. Now, if you go to Malachi 3:6, and you don't have to look these up, I got them written down here. I mean, if you want to, you can, but in Malachi 3:6, for I am the Lord, I change not. You want a changing God? What in the world would we have to depend on if we had a changing God? Psalm 102, verses 25 through 27. Of old, now the psalmist is writing this about God. Of old hast thou laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy hands. They shall perish. That's not eternal, is it? But thou shalt endure. So God will be forever. Yea, all of them shall wax old like a garment. As a vesture shalt thou change them, and they shall be changed. Verse 27. But thou art the same, and thy years shall have no end. Who would you want to depend on? James 1, verse 17. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variables, neither shadow of turning. Hebrews 13:8. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. So what are we seeking? What is your challenge? What is my challenge? What is mankind's challenge? To not get caught up in the change. It's going to change. This world is ever changing. In the 1960s, where I grew up out on Route 1025, we didn't have telephones. If you wanted to contact somebody, you wrote them a letter, and you give it to Mr. Fannin, our mailman, and he took it to wherever he took it to. I remember him driving that big old four-wheel drive green truck. And he came every day with a smile on his face to get the mail or to bring mail. But we communicated with letters. We never had a phone. Didn't even know how to use one. But then in the late 60s, they put in a telephone line. 12 people on a party line. Might as well not have a phone, right? But you could keep up with the gossip. And now, today, what have we got today? But here's the challenge. What you have today doesn't take away from your goal to get to heaven. The challenge that we have faced, there's always change. From writing letters to family to communicate with them, to now sending text messages or FaceTime. I mean, immediately you can contact anybody almost. It's so changing. But don't get caught up in the change. Get caught up in the good that you must do with that change. That's the challenge. So we need, even to our toils and trouble, but we give all this to work toward heaven. No matter how much the change is, no matter what changes, you can depend on the very fact God will never change. He delivered His word for thousands of years to mankind. He's still doing it today. The same word, the one you can depend on. It's not a phone that you hold in your hand or wait for God to call you and tell you what to do. He is so consistent, we don't even know how to explain His consistency because of all the changes that we have in our lives. But those changes are not the enemy of us. What our challenge is that we need to be more concerned about the new work than the event of the change. Does that make sense? We need to be more concerned about doing the right thing regardless of the change. We need to seek God and keep His commandments. And this is what the preacher, the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes, is telling all of us. He said, I've searched all this stuff out with wisdom. And the only thing I can figure out, there's no good in them, verse 12. I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and do good in his life. There's no consistency in what you have, what you will have, what you have had. But you can still do good with it. But don't get caught up in the change. Do good with the change. Don't fuss and gripe. A person asked me one time, if you lost everything you had and had to start from nothing, would you be thankful you once had it? Or would you gripe and fuss about what happened to it? I don't even know how to answer that. How would you answer it? I'm not sure you can answer it. Maybe you can. I don't know. Now, there's some people in Western Kentucky who are probably going to find out. Are they going to be thankful they once had what they had and willing to face this monstrous change with the right attitude, still serve God, still move forward with the hope of heaven? That's what we hope for, isn't it? So let's do good with the change. Let's don't worry about the change, because it's going to change. You can't stop it. God's not going to change, and you can't change that. So you got one choice, and that's to do good. Enjoy your life and do good. Enjoy your life and do good. Verse 12, I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life. Rejoice. Be thankful. Be happy. Don't worry about the change. And guess what? Mankind don't like change. I want everything the same, don't you? I want it all the same. But it's going to change. We can't help it. Verse 13, and also that every man should eat and drink, enjoy the good of his labor. It is the gift of God. Your labor, what you earn for yourself, what you do, and how you do it. If you're doing good, don't forget what it says there at the end of verse 12, do good in his life. If you're doing good in your life, all the work and labor and things that you've toiled for, what are you supposed to do with it? Enjoy it. It's going to change. Enjoy it. Why would you enjoy this topsy-turvy world? Because you got a hope of heaven. But more importantly, what you have, what you earned, what you've labored for, whether it be a lot or a little, whether it be a friendship or whatever it is, it's a gift of God. I think we need to let that sink in. A gift of God. All this turmoil and all this trials and all this trouble and all this travail, all this vanity, all this vexation of spirit, all the changes we go through in a lifetime, it's a gift of God to make you stronger and to make you want to seek Him, to make people want to seek God, because that's the only unchangeable hope we have. So do good and enjoy your life. Enjoy what you have. Enjoy people. Enjoy each other. Something changes. Enjoy it. Don't get caught up in the change. Don't let it change your life to where you don't want to follow God, but take on the task of enjoying the change. It's how we deal with it. You know, a response to people when you're faced with a challenge, and everybody in here has been at one time or another. Somebody has challenged you in some way in your life that kind of probably ticked you off, right? Said something to you, hurt your feelings, done something to you, done something to a member of the family, said something, whatever it might have been. It's your reaction to that is what determines how you're living. I know in my life, I've looked back and I see things that were said and done, and I would react. At the time, seemed like the right thing to do, but when I look back on it, I think, man, I could have handled that so much better. Anybody in here ever have the same experience? Everybody. I could have handled that so much better. So let's realize when we have those things come before us, it's a gift of God to train you to want to be in heaven. So use it rightly if you can. And you can. Verse 14. Boy, there's a bunch said in this one, aren't they? I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. And God doeth it, that men should fear before Him. Now, we could go on and on and on about what God does is forever. When God made the earth, and as Brother Philip pointed out earlier, it was very good. So what has happened since the beginning of making the earth for mankind? The sun comes up, the sun goes down, the wind, the water, all the things that God has set in motion still going on, isn't it? What He's done it forever.
You know, we get reminded of that in Revelation 22, verse 18 and 19. That there's nothing we can add to it, there's nothing that we can take from it. It's going to stay the same.
Right. if God put it in there for us, then it's necessary, right? So if we take something out, then we've took out something that's necessary for us. If there's,
Division in the church.
yeah,
You're dividing, you're separating yourself from God.
right.
And that's the way most people live.
But if I mean, God said this is the way it is, just like you said. Okay, now we're going to take something away from that. Okay, now it's not the way God said it, right? It's the way man wants it. Okay, let's put that back so we got what God said. We're not going to take it away. But we're going to add to it. We're smarter than God, so we're going to add something to it. But he didn't put anything in there that needs to be taken away because we need it all. Okay, now if we add to it, we've added more to what God says we need than what we need. Brother Floyd.
Yeah, all the way from the 11th verse down to 14 that you're looking at now there causes me to go back to Isaiah 55, 8 and 9, where God tells us plainly that my ways are not your ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts. We need to learn who we can totally depend on.
Right.
When we look in God's Word, and John's Word tells us that God's Word is truth. It is truth. There's not any,
There's no blemishes.
no space in between that or anything.
Right.
It is the way it is.
That's right.
And when God commands something, whether we understand it or not, we need to accept it.
Yep.
It's not man's ways that's going to get us anywhere. It's God's ways that's going to, when it says he would do good, how can I know how to do good? I look at what God has laid out before me is the only way I can know.
Yep. In God's sight, what's good? Right? What is good in God's sight? Well, I don't know. Well, how am I going to find out? He told me. So I go to God and find out what's good in his sight. Excellent point, Brother Floyd. Excellent. And that's exactly right. And God says, this is the way it's going to be. Well, I don't like it like that. That's right. Unchanging. And Brother Floyd is exactly right. You accept God's word and live by it. Now, I'm going to tell you, when I first became a Christian, there was things in the Scripture that I learned after being a Christian that I really had trouble with. And probably one of the biggest ones was pray for those who despitefully use you. And I've told you this before. Now, I had a problem with that. And I remember talking to a Christian sister once, and she had problems with it. And we sat and talked for over an hour about that one verse. And my explaining to her why we need to pray for those who despitefully use you, using God's word to teach her, taught me why I need to pray for them. I didn't teach her, and she didn't teach me, but God's word taught both of us. Okay? So I can handle that. That's not a problem anymore in my life. It's not. It's not a problem. It's disappointing sometimes, but it's never been a problem for me to pray for anybody and everybody. I have no problem praying for anybody.
Jesus on the cross is probably the best example of that very thing.
Yep.
That was one of the last things to come out of his mouth.
Yeah.
Forgive them, for they know not what to do. And most people think that because Jesus said that, they were forgiven right then and there. And there's a lot of Church of Christ people on Facebook, and I've been talking to this one Church of Christ minister. And
Right.
And, but back to prayer, I mean, like I said, that's one of the last things that Jesus.
Yeah. And what about the Philippian jailer? What must I do to be saved? Well, if you believe, okay, that's all. We'll stop right there, right? No. He didn't know. Just like the people at the crucifixion, they didn't know what they'd done wrong until they heard Peter on the day of Pentecost. Go ahead.
So when Stephen was stoned,
Yeah.
he's almost said the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I guess the point is when you tell people what God says, you're either gonna make them glad or mad.
Yeah.
And Stephen made blood people mad, had enough to kill him.
Yeah, but I don't know how you all feel about it, but I wish I was Stephen. That sounds silly. I can't think of anything that I would rather be than be able to teach and preach the truth to the people who won't listen to it and them stone me to death, and I can look up and see Jesus standing on the right-hand throne of God. I just can't think of anything that would be better than that. Wouldn't you want to be a Stephen? Good point. Excellent point, Brother Sid. The gift of God, verse 13. I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. And God doeth it, that men should fear before him. Have you ever been afraid that what you have just done has separated you between you and your God? Have you ever had that fear in your life? Oh my goodness, I've messed up. I've messed up. I should not have said that. I should not have done that. So how do you fear God? When you're not doing what he says, then you're going to face the wrath of God. Now, we all talk in this world, most religious people, not all, but most, teach and preach the love of God and what a great God he is, and he's all that. He's all that. Even these challenges, these changes that we're studying here in Ecclesiastes, they're a challenge. They're not easy, but this is all a gift of God. This is to help us be stronger and better servants of Jesus Christ and the God of heaven. So when we think that we should fear before God, let's talk about the wrath of God. I heard a Baptist preacher on the radio this morning that made the statement that the United States is being judged by God right now because everything we do just gets worse and worse and worse, and we're facing God's judgment. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't even remember if he used Bible verses to back it up. But I do know in the Old Testament scriptures, when God told his people to do something and they didn't do it, he brought judgment upon them. And in the book of Leviticus chapter 18, before they went into the promised land, God told the Israelites, he told Moses, he said, here's why you're getting this land, because men are sleeping with men and women with women, and it's abomination to me, and if you go in there and do the same thing, the land will spew you out too. I change not. Should we fear God and his wrath? Yeah, you better. Good way of putting it.
Better be contained with all those who do.
Yep. Fear God and keep his commandments. That's the way the book ends, right? We should fear before God, a God who can create all that's created and set it in motion that lasts for thousands and thousands of years, that work just so beautifully, so wonderfully. The changes that we've seen in our lifetime here under the sun, You've never seen a change in God's Word in your lifetime. You've never seen God change in your lifetime. When God promised those who don't do what He says that they'll be cast into the eternal lake of fire that was prepared for His devils and His angels, He hasn't changed His mind on that. He hasn't changed His mind. And He's not going to. But we should fear God in a way of respect, to honor Him and to glorify Him. There's nothing that you and I can do that God has commanded us to do. Everything that we do that God tells us to do, there's no glory in that for us. We're just doing what we're supposed to do. When I was growing up, Mom said, take the trash out. Well, you take the trash out. There's no glory in taking the trash out. I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do. When God says, fear God, that's just what I'm supposed to do. Let's respect God to the point that we have one thing to do, and that's to serve Him. No glory and honor in it for you. Not here. Not under the sun. That's just what you're supposed to do. Okay, we'll quit right there and maybe have some more things to say about verse 14 next week. Thank you all very much. Figure it out? Thank you.
I feel so bad. I forgot to put this on. Wilma texted me.
Okay.
But her niece's husband, that's his name, has COVID. He's on a ventilator.
Okay.
And Jim, I don't know if you talked to him, he had
Yeah.
5 teeth removed. He's in pain.
Yeah,
But he does go Wednesday.
Yeah.
Okay.
I talked to Jim yesterday, and I hadn't heard that about Wilma.